So hello everyone and welcome from like this hybrid session of Surfing the Ocean. I'm very happy to see you all. It's been quite a bit. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming from Berkeley, Tiffany Ding, who's a PhD student under supervision of Michael, and who's going to introduce to her new recently like put on archive work on marketplace operator and competition. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. Yeah, so let's get started. Today I'll be talking about some work that I did with people mostly at Amazon. So Omar, Dean Foster, or Dominique, Dirk, and of course Mike. Yeah, so just a roadmap of the talk today. So I'll first introduce the problem setting and hopefully convince you that it's a relevant and interesting problem. And then I'll present our model for understanding this problem. I'll explain our main results and provide a high-level idea of how we obtain these results. So there's not really any like complicated mathematical tools required, just a matter of constructing arguments by connecting some basic tools. And then I'll highlight some practical implications of our main results. So now for some motivation. So suppose you operate a farmer's market. I don't know if I can move this. Okay, that's slightly better. And in return for like operating the farmer's market and taking care of logistics, the farmers at the market will pay you some percentage of their revenue. And one day, one of the farmers, Farmer Joe, realizes that he's the only farmer that's selling carrots, and carrots are in really high demand, and he increases his price by 200%. And after he does this, the customers that normally come to your farmer's market are very unhappy. And as a result, they begin going to other farmers markets instead of yours. It's not good for you or the farmers that sell your market. So you as the operator, you can't really control how Farmer Joe sets his prices, but you want to somehow induce him to lower his price because the price he set now is too high and it's not good for your market. So you have an idea that maybe you can enter the market as a competing carrot seller. Okay, so you think a bit more about how you can do this. So some considerations. First, when you're setting your price for your carrots, you shouldn't set a price that's too high. Obvious, like if you set a price that's higher than the price that Farmer Joe is currently setting, then you're not really doing anything. But you also shouldn't set a price that is too low. So if you set a price that's so low that if Farmer Joe can't make a profit, if he matches your price, then you entering the market doesn't really have an impact on Farmer Joe either. And the final consideration is you need to be a credible seller, meaning that if you set a competitive price, but you only have a couple of carrots for sale, then Farmer Joe won't view you as a credible competitor and will just keep doing what he's doing. So from this, we can see that inducing competition is a bit of a delicate task. So in our work, we'll try to understand this problem. So our first guiding question is how can we as a marketplace operator set our price and inventory to induce competition? Second question is, when is it beneficial for you as a marketplace operator to induce competition? And third, what are the implications for consumer surplus and total welfare? Okay, so here I'll talk about some real examples of marketplace operators who are also sellers, just to convince you that this is a structure that does exist. So first example is Amazon. So here are some staplers that you can find on Amazon.com. The left one is an Amazon Basic stapler that's sold by Amazon, and then the one on the right is sold by some other company. We also have Walmart. So similarly, the one on the left is Great Value light bulbs, which is Walmart's like private label. So those are made by Walmart, and then the ones on the right are made by some other seller. Target is also an example. So Target, I'm actually not sure if you have it in France, but in America it's quite popular. And they have a bunch of their own like Target brands for various products. Okay. And before describing my model, I'll talk a bit about some duopoly models that have been studied in the past. So first I'll talk about standard duopolies, where both firms are just like profit maximizing firms. So very early work looked at duopolies that had a simultaneous action. So both players would act at the same time. And in these models, you would have a single decision variable. So the players choose either the price that they will sell the good at or the quantity that they will order of the good. So in a Cournot duopoly, the two sellers simultaneously choose their quantities, and their quantities determine the price. So the price is just a function of the sum of those two quantities. In a Bertrand duopoly, now the decision variable is price. So the two sellers each choose their prices at the same time. And then the lower price seller gets all of the demand, which is just the demand function D evaluated at that price. And then the higher price seller gets no demand. And in the case of a tie, they split demand evenly. And then in the 1930s, Stackelberg proposed a sequential version of a duopoly, where now one of the sellers will set their quantity first. So it's a modification of the Cournot duopoly. So they set their quantity, and then the other player sees what quantity they've set, and then they then set their quantity. Yeah, and then following that, there was then work on duopolies where you have two decision variables. So now you model the firms as choosing both their price and their quantity. And this was looked at in both simultaneous and sequential settings. Okay, so that was all work on settings where both firms are profit maximizing. There also been some work on mixed oligopolies, where instead of having two profit maximizing firms, you have one profit maximizing firm and then another firm that's welfare maximizing. So you can think of this as the government. They are not solely seeking to maximize their own profit, but care about the welfare of the consumers. So the way that our work connects to all of this existing work is we will consider a sequential duopoly with two decision variables, so price and quantity, where one firm is a profit maximizing private firm, and then the other one, so you can think of Amazon, is like maximizing some combination of profit and welfare. So as a marketplace operator, you want to make money, but you also care about the health of the marketplace, which is connected to the welfare. Yeah, so now I'll describe our model. So in our model, we have two players, a marketplace operator and an independent seller. So the marketplace operator is big, and they have to make decisions far in advance. And they also care about customer satisfaction in addition to their own profit. The independent seller, on the other hand, they tend to be smaller, can make decisions more reactively. They solely care about maximizing their own profit. And since they're selling at the marketplace being run by the operator, they will pay a fraction of their revenue to the marketplace operator. Okay, so the way we model these things is first, we will model this as a Stackelberg duopoly, since the marketplace operator we're modeling as like having to make decisions further in advance, so they're slower in some sense, so they cannot be as reactive. So they're the leader, and then the independent seller will see their actions and then make their choice. Yeah, so just written out here. So marketplace operator chooses their price and quantity. independent seller observes that and then chooses their own price and quantity. And these two lines are captured by the utility functions of the two players. So I'll break down this equation a bit. So first, maybe I'll explain what each of the parameters are. So alpha is the referral fee, so the fraction of the revenue made by the independent seller that they have to pay to the operator. We also have K, which is the marketplace operator's additional benefit per sale beyond their immediate profit. So this is capturing customer satisfaction. So like every time a customer is able to make a purchase, this makes them happy, and that's good for the marketplace operator because then the customer is more likely to come back. And then there's also the per unit cost, slightly cut off. So CMO is the marketplace operator's per unit cost, and CIS is the independent seller's per unit cost. So the way we combine these things in utility functions, this first term here, and I haven't defined D yet, but this will be demand defined in the next slide. So this here is the quantity sold by the marketplace operator directly. So for each unit they sell it at their price, PMO, so they get PMO utility, plus the K utility they get from each sale that is made at their marketplace. The second term is here, the amount that is sold by the independent seller. And each time the independent seller sells something, they're selling it at price PIS, and they have to pay alpha fraction of that to the marketplace operator. And the marketplace operator similarly will get a plus K for each unit sold by the independent seller. And then you subtract out the cost of acquiring the inventory. And then for the second equation, which is the independent seller's utility. Yeah, so this term is similar to here, is just the quantity sold by the independent seller. And after paying alpha fraction of revenue to the operator, they have 1 minus alpha left. And the second term here is just subtracting out the cost of their inventory. Okay. Any questions about that? Yeah, so now we have to define the demand functions, the D's on the previous slide. The way we define the demand function will be in terms of an original demand function and a residual demand function. So whoever sets the lower price gets to face the original demand function, and then whoever sets the higher price faces the residual demand function, which is less favorable. We'll use this notation of a capital D as with subscript I being player I's demand. Here is a demand function for the independent seller. So if they set a lower price than the marketplace operator, then they face the original demand function, otherwise they face the residual demand function. And one thing to note here is we assume that ties are broken in favor of the independent seller. So there's an equal sign for the first case, and then the demand function for the marketplace operator is just the flip of that. Okay, so for the original demand function, to make the math nice, we assume that it's linear with unit slope. So it looks like this. And then for the residual demand function, things get a little bit more tricky. So the residual demand function is telling you for the higher priced seller I, when the other player set the lower price PJ and had quantity QJ, like how much demand is left over for you. So this depends on what customers come first and buy at the lower price. So one assumption you can make is intensity rationing. So this assumes that the customers with the highest willingness to pay or highest valuation for the good arrive first. So they're the ones who buy at the lower price, which means that after the lower price seller sells out, the customers that are left are the customers who are like least willing to pay. So this is quite unfavorable for the higher priced seller. So what this looks like is here we have the original demand function, and under intensity rationing after here I'm assuming the lower price seller is a marketplace operator, so it just shifts the demand function down by the inventory of the marketplace operator. Another assumption you can make is proportional rationing. So this essentially is assuming that the probability that a customer is able to buy at a lower price is not dependent on their valuation. So when you make this assumption, the residual demand curve will just be like a steepened version of the original demand function. Yeah, so depending on the product, one of these assumptions may be more realistic. But just to get a full picture of what's going on, we analyze both of these rationing rules. Yeah. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions. Okay. Now I'm going to define some key prices. Okay, so I'll use P naught to denote.
Like, how can you estimate these two assumptions? If they give you like a product with some transactions and like a market, like can you estimate from, I don't know, is there a bias? Is there like if for a certain kind of products on these kind of assumptions?
That's a good question. I think in general it's very hard to estimate demand curves. And I would say like the way I would choose between which assumption is more reasonable is probably just based on intuition. So like for intensity rationing, maybe you have like a product that people are really excited for. I don't know, like the release of a new iPhone or something, and the people who want it most will like go wait in line to buy the iPhone. So yeah, the people in that case, like the customers with the highest willingness to pay are the ones who buy it first. I think for a lot of products though, it probably falls into the bin of proportional rationing, where like maybe like let's say with toilet paper, like the time you buy toilet paper is just like the time you run out, and that's random. So there's not like any ordering to how the customers arrive. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so some key prices. Yeah, so P naught, I'll use that to denote the independent seller's break-even price. So this is just the lowest price that the independent seller is willing to sell at. And we'll assume that given the choice between selling a positive quantity at this price P naught and not selling at all, they'll choose to sell at P naught. And this, like the exact form is just from like rearranging their utility function. And the other key price will be like P star. So this is the independent seller's optimal sole seller price. So basically the price that they would set if the marketplace operator were not a seller. So the independent seller can just act as a monopolist essentially. Okay. So now we're going to start computing the equilibrium. And specifically the type of equilibrium we want to compute is a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. So just in case you haven't seen this concept before. So in our game, the actions actually have like two values. So I'll just use A to denote the action set chosen by the marketplace operator, and B be the actions chosen by the independent seller. So in order for a strategy profile A star and B star, which is a function of A, to be a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, we need to satisfy two conditions. So first, this B star function, given an action A chosen by the marketplace operator, the independent seller has to be best responding to that A. And then this A star must be like maximizing the utility for the marketplace operator, plugging in this best response function for the independent seller. Okay, so we'll derive this best response function first. So to simplify things, just very informally, intuitively, the independent seller should always meet their demand, whatever it may be. So writing out slightly more formally. So given a fixed price that the independent seller is going to set, and also a quantity and price of the marketplace operator, it's utility maximizing for the independent seller to set their quantity equal to the demand. So the implication of this is instead of optimizing over both the P and Q, we can just focus on deriving the independent seller's best response in terms of their price P. That simplifies things a little bit.
Can I ask a silly question?
Mm-hmm.
I can see in the case of Amazon, somebody selling on Amazon, Amazon might have access to the price and the quantity held by Amazon of the independent seller. But the independent seller is never going to know the quantity held by Amazon. So in a sense, how well defined is this in reality? So if they're competing with one another, if they're not operating in an unethical manner, some of these quantities aren't going to be known.
I think I'll admit it's slightly stylized, but I think the independent seller can still get information, definitely about the price of Amazon, but also the quantity. I don't know, when you use Amazon, if you've ever noticed, sometimes it'll say oh, this item is in low stock. So we as the customers can see that, and also the independent seller could see that too. Yeah. Another argument for the stackable brick setup is since Amazon is the marketplace operator, they can choose what information to give to their independent sellers. So if they wanted the independent seller to know what Amazon's inventory is, they can communicate that. Will that help a little?
Seems slightly unethical, to be honest. That one seems like price fixing.
Another argument could be that it happens over multiple rounds, you order inventory maybe once a month or something. So the marketplace operator, or if it behaves one way in February, then the independent seller observes that and can use that information for future months. Yeah, so now we can think about what are the possible strategies that the independent seller could take. So one is that after observing Amazon's price, they could decide to compete by setting a lower or equal price. And when they do so, they get to face the more favorable original demand function. They could also choose to wait it out by setting a price that's higher than the marketplace operator's price. And when they do so, they face the less favorable residual demand function, but there's the benefit of being able to set a higher price. And they can also abstain from selling at all, and I'll denote this by setting a price that's equal to infinity. So their quantity is equal to 0. Now I'll introduce some language to describe the different types of competition that could arise. So we'll say that the independent seller has been demonopolized if they set a price that's strictly lower than the price that they would have set had the marketplace operator not been a seller. And we'll say that the independent seller is competing if they set a price that does not exceed the marketplace operators. And when the marketplace operator has set a price that's higher than the independent seller's optimal sole seller price, we say that the independent seller is passively competing if they just set their optimal sole seller price. So I say passively competing because they are competing because they've set a price that's lower than the marketplace operators, but it's passive in the sense that their behavior hasn't been changed by the entry of the marketplace operator. So just a visual representation of how these different definitions interact. So whenever you're passively competing, you're also competing. But just because you're competing does not mean you're demonopolized. And actually, you don't have to be competing in order to be demonopolized. So we'll see that, I think, on the next slide. Okay. So now we want to know, given the marketplace operator's actions, how should the independent seller best respond? So for intensity rationing, this is a visualization of their optimal strategy as a function of the marketplace operator's price and quantity. So when the operator has set a high price, the independent seller will choose to compete by setting a lower price. So this region is where it's passively competing because the marketplace operator in this region has set a price higher than their optimal sole seller price. In this region, between the independent seller's break-even price and the optimal sole seller price, there is actually genuine competition, as long as the operator has large enough inventory. Because if they set their inventory too low, then you end up in this weight region where the independent seller thinks that, oh, you're not really a credible competitor. I'll just wait for you to sell out and then set whatever price I want. And then finally, there's this region where the marketplace operator has set a price below the independent seller's break-even price, and they have a lot of inventory. So the independent seller can't do anything that can yield a positive profit, so they just abstain from selling. And here's the similar plot under proportional rationing. So the main things that have changed are the square is now a triangle. So the independent seller abstains less, which makes sense because the proportional rationing assumption is more favorable for the higher priced seller. And this curve is slightly shifted upwards. And the stripes here are worth pointing out. So the stripes denote demonopolization. So on the previous slide, we defined demonopolization as when the independent seller is setting a price that's strictly lower than they would have otherwise. So in these two genuine compete regions, they are demonopolized, but interestingly for intensity rationing, even when the independent seller is waiting, they are also demonopolized, and that's because under the intensity rationing assumption, you're assuming that all of the customers with the highest willingness to pay are buying from the lower price seller. So once those customers are removed, it's optimal for the independent seller to set a lower price. Okay, so how did we get to this plot? Just some intuition. So when the marketplace operator sets a high price, the independent seller can still set their optimal sole seller price and get all demand and face the original demand function. So they're passively competing. When the operator sets an intermediate price, now the independent seller has to decide between whether they want to compete by matching the marketplace operator's price or wait for them to run out of inventory. Yeah, this depends on how much inventory the marketplace operator has. And down in this region, since the operator's price is below the independent seller's break-even price, the independent seller can't get positive utility by matching the price, so they have to decide between waiting and in the case where there's no demand left at a price that the independent seller is willing to sell at, the independent seller abstains. Okay, so just in full detail, just the mathematical formalization of what we described visually on the previous two slides. So I think the main interesting cases are these two, where there's a critical threshold. So here I have this critical threshold like Q dagger, which when the operator has an inventory above this Q dagger, the seller competes. Otherwise, they wait. And the exact form of this function depends on the rationing rule. So I've written them out down here for intensity rationing and proportional rationing. Yeah, similarly for the boundary between waiting and abstaining when the price is low, we have some function double dagger, and that's written out there. And finally, this is the price that the independent seller sets when they wait. So under proportional rationing, they just set their sole selling price. But for intensity rationing, they set their sole selling price minus the marketplace operator's inventory divided by 2, which is kind of interesting. So that means that when the marketplace operator has more inventory, the independent seller will set a lower price, even when they're waiting. Okay. So now I'll talk a little bit about the implications for competition. So when the marketplace operator sets a price above P star, then the independent seller is not demonopolized. So that's probably not good. But also when the price is too low, the independent seller does not compete, which is also maybe not so good. But in this middle region, when the marketplace operator sets a price that's below P star, and the independent seller best responds by competing, then the independent seller is demonopolized. And also under intensity rationing, we see that it's the independent seller is demonopolized when they wait. Okay, so that was all this first part, deriving the best response and interpreting the best response of the independent seller. Now to get the full equilibrium of the game, we just have to plug into the second expression. Okay, so I'll talk about what are the possible strategies that the marketplace operator could take. So one is that they can induce the independent seller to abstain. So they do this by setting a price that's low enough and a quantity that's high enough that the independent seller's best response is to not sell at all. They can also induce compete by setting a moderate price and a quantity that's high enough that the independent seller's best response is to compete. And yeah, induce wait is similar. This requires setting a low price and a low quantity. And in this final case, we'll also include when the marketplace operator themselves sets a quantity of 0. So when they abstain. So before solving the equilibrium of the full game, we'll consider a constrained game. So just as a reminder, in the full game, both players choose both their price and their quantity. In this constrained game that I'll consider first, we'll assume that the price of the marketplace operator is fixed, and they can only choose their quantity, but they must sell at the fixed price. So via some like straightforward second derivative arguments, we can show that depending on the value of PMO, there are only a couple of candidates that could be optimal for the inventory that the marketplace operator should set. So for low prices, the only candidate is 0. For prices between P naught and P star, there are 3 candidates. So 0, the Q dagger threshold, and then Q dagger minus epsilon. So just getting as close as you can to the boundary without actually being at the boundary. And then for large prices, there are 2 candidates, 0, and then the quantity demanded at that price. Yeah, so then to get the optimal Q star given a fixed price, you can just evaluate the utility at each of the candidates and determine which candidate leads to the highest utility. So that's just written out here. And here, UMO is assuming that the independent seller is playing their best response. Okay, so that was for the constraint game. Now we can use that to solve for the equilibrium of the full game, where now the marketplace operator chooses both their quantity and their price. Since there's a finite set of optimal quantities given a price PMO, we can just plug that into the utility and optimize. It'll look something like this. So each of these lines is plugging in one of the optimal candidates for the range of price values where it is a valid optimal candidate. So like here, for example, like 0 was an optimal candidate for all values of PMO. And then here, like Q of PMO is only valid for small prices. And then we have 2 more optimal candidates for this intermediate range. So yeah, we can use calculus to figure out what is the optimal value for each, and then just compare between the optimal values along each of these lines. Okay, so now I'll talk about some implications. So one question we may have is, how does the equilibrium change depending on the relative costs of the 2 sellers? So here is a plot that illustrates that. So on the x-axis is the cost the cost per unit for an independent seller of acquiring the good. And then on the y-axis is the cost for the marketplace operator. So we see that when it's very expensive for the marketplace operator to acquire the good, the equilibrium that they will want to get is that they want the independent seller to compete. This makes sense because it's expensive for the marketplace operators to sell the good themselves. So they'd rather get the independent seller to sell it. Conversely, when the price or the cost for the marketplace operator is lower, at equilibrium, usually the marketplace operator will just sell themselves. So that puts us in the blue, independent seller abstains region. And then there's a small yellow region in the middle where the 2 players have similar prices. And in those cases, it can be optimal for the independent seller to wait. And these plots are showing what are the corresponding optimal prices and quantities. So one interesting thing is in this region here, where at equilibrium, the marketplace operator finds it optimal to induce the independent seller to compete. They're actually doing so by buying very little inventory, almost 0. So the effect is small, but I guess still non-zero. So they buy some small amount of inventory in order to get the independent seller to lower their price slightly. So another practical question is, how should the marketplace operator set their referral fee that they charge to the independent sellers? So we can plot the equilibrium utility as a function of alpha and see where it's maximized. So this yellow line here is the utility that the marketplace operator would achieve if the independent seller were not selling at all. So all the utility is just from the operator's own sales. And we see that for any cost, so each line is a different cost for the independent seller. And we see that like if you set alpha too high, then the independent seller stops selling. So there's no longer the pink highlighting, which means that the independent seller has stopped selling. And that puts us at this yellow utility, which is not very good because as the operator, you want your sellers to participate. We see that like there is some maximizing value that is not simply just cranking alpha as high as you can.
I'm just wondering whether alpha would be sufficient actually to induce a low price for the independent seller. Because for instance, if you make alpha depends on the price displayed by the independent seller, it can act in a way as a tax, let's say. For instance, if the farmer Joe decides to sell at $200, then you set alpha to 100%, and so you want it. Then you make it decrease smoothly so as to induce the price. Would it be an equivalent tool as inducing competition?
That's an interesting question. I think it would just be a different game, but that's an interesting tool to think about and seems implementable. Yeah. Yeah, so we have this parameter K that's like capturing the additional like non-monetary benefit, and it's supposed to be representing the impact on customer experience. In practice, like different products may have different values of K. Maybe like for a normal product, it's like 2. But then if there's a product that the customer like really wants and they're able to buy it at your marketplace, they'll be extra happy. So like K could be larger, like 10 or something. So we're wondering like depending on the value of K, should the marketplace operator behave differently? So these plots are showing like for different values of K, and then the x-axis is the cost per unit to the independent seller. And I would say the takeaway here is when we look at the plot for the quantity that the marketplace operator finds it optimal to buy, it's increasing generally as K increases. So the marketplace operator is buying more inventory for products that have a bigger impact on customer experience.
Just another silly question. Why is K not a function of the price? Surely I'm happier as a customer if I pay a low price for something, right?
That's a good question. I write that as one of the extensions that should be pursued. Yeah, I agree with that. I think like it should be like proportional to consumer surplus. But actually the way this is modeled is like somewhat reflective of how it's like thought about like internally at Amazon. So like that's like one reason we have the K. It's not like seen as a function of price, but yeah, I agree. We should also consider the impact of price. Yeah, so one of our guiding questions is like, how does this affect consumer surplus when the operator enters the market? We can show that the consumer surplus is always at least as high as if the marketplace operator did not participate as a seller. And actually, whenever the marketplace operator sets a price that's lower than the price that would otherwise be set by the independent seller, it strictly increases consumer surplus. And we also take a look at the total welfare. So the total welfare we measure as the consumer surplus plus the utility of the two sellers. And these plots are showing the difference between the welfare with the two sellers and the welfare with only the independent seller for like all different game parameters. And the takeaway here is that this difference is always non-negative and is often positive. Yeah, okay, so one last slide just to summarize things. In online marketplaces, we have an interesting duopoly in which one player is both the operator and a seller. So we formulated this game and solved for the equilibrium. And the analysis that we produce can be used to guide marketplace operators' policies, and some directions for future work, which we already alluded to. So one would be determining welfare implications under proportional rationing. So the analysis we've done so far is only for intensity rationing, because it's actually not straightforward to compute consumer surplus under proportional rationing. Second direction would be like robustness checks. So what happens under other demand functions, or if your inventory is constrained to be an integer value. So implicitly, we're assuming now that like Q can be like any positive or non-negative real number, but that might not be the case in practice. So another direction is improving the realism of the model. So replacing K right now, which is just a constant with maybe a multiplier of consumer surplus, which takes into account the price. And another thing is considering a positive salvage value, meaning that there should be value to inventory that's left unsold. So even when the marketplace operator buys inventory for the sake of inducing the independent seller to compete, like currently in our model, that inventory is not sold and has zero value, but in practice it does have value because you can sell it in the next period for a lot of products, unless it's perishable. And some other modeling extensions that could be considered is what happens if there are multiple independent sellers. That might change the game a lot. And also what happens if timing is endogenous. So we've analyzed a Stackelberg game, but what if the operator can choose between the Stackelberg game and the simultaneous game? Which one would they prefer? Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you very much. So we have plenty of questions already, but are there some more? If not, maybe I can start. Oh, good. It's you.
You always go last.
Can you go to the previous slide? And on the last question that you said, like, what happened when you have independent seller? Would you feel that like competition between independent seller would be the leading term, or would you feel that like it's more about like a single independent seller against the big guy, against Amazon or Walmart? So I don't know if my question is clear. Like I feel that can you model the interaction, and would you feel that like interaction is really where like it would dramatically change what you have just discovered in the paper?
Yeah, I think it's not so obvious. Like, okay, in like standard like markets without a marketplace operator, I think what ends up happening is like whichever seller has the lowest cost ends up like being the only seller. So maybe there could be some argument that the multiple independent seller case could reduce down to our case. But yeah, I'm not so sure. Yeah.
In the case of interpreting this K variable, in the case of when you're not like you don't have a government, you don't actually have someone who's interested in welfare, would it make more sense to interpret K as like a measure of loyalty to the brand, like, or the likelihood that you will come back and buy again?
Yeah, it's somehow capturing like the future value a customer will bring to you if they're like made happy. Yeah.
Doesn't, like in the government setting, I agree that like welfare makes sense, but for like a marketplace like Amazon, I do not think it makes sense to think of it as the Amazon is trying to maximize consumer surplus. That does not make sense to me.
Yeah, it's more meant to capture like future value.
Okay, maybe it's just mine, not really. It being more than 10 years since I've studied economics, so maybe that's. And then the other thing I was wondering is between the two regimes that you had, one was like the intensity rationing,
Mhm.
and the other was
Proportional rationing.
proportional rationing. Do you think you could like take a mixture of the two, like some kind of like sliding scale between the two extremes, and analyze that game, whether it's the parameter that you don't know between the two? Like some proportion of consumers have intensity rationing, and some proportion of consumers have other rationing.
I think in theory you can. The hard part is if you want to get like analytical results, like if you don't have a nice form for the residual demand function, that can get tricky, but I'm
But
sure.
actually, if you had it for both of the endpoints, then for the middle, it might be doable, like for
Yeah, I think it could be doable. I'll have to.
it'd be more realistic, right? That it's some proportion of consumers behave this way and another proportion behave that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's possible. Yeah.
More.
Have you ever conducted any experiments with Amazon to test or justify your models and results? Because you said that your analysis can be used to guide marketplace behaviors, policies.
So far not yet, but maybe that'd be nice.
I have just maybe last question or two, just about what just said. Like, what are the opinions about? You said that you work with people with Amazon, so like, I mean, Amazon of course must be interested in welfare if like they conduct this kind of experiment, like or research wise. So do you really feel that there's a need like to understand what is the welfare to maintain some kind of competition within the market from Amazon, or not really?
I think so. Like if there's like a product that's only sold by like one seller, like they can set whatever price they want, and like price hikes are like when a customer visits Amazon, they don't really think, oh, there's an independent seller behind it. They just see like, oh, this is the price that Amazon is giving to me. So if they see like, oh, like I have to buy carrots for like $200, that like reflects badly on Amazon. So like thinking about ways that Amazon can make the customer have a better experience is important to them. So this is one way, and there are probably other ways.
Okay. You don't have any more questions? Like, thank you again, Tiffany, and thank you.